Are your people working hard but not reaching their full potential? The problem is not effort, it is development. At the Modern Observer Group, we transform workforce development into real performance. Our human-centered achievement programs help your team think better, communicate stronger, and execute at a higher level. That means higher employee engagement, stronger leadership, and measurable results across your organization. If you want a workforce that performs, leads, and delivers, it is time to invest in your people. Visit modernobserver.com and discover how the Modern Observer Group helps you build a workforce that wins.
Welcome to a special edition of Carnivore Radio. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with Dr. Eric Lopkin. And we have a special guest, Adam Swart. He's the founder of Crowds on Demand. Very interesting concept. And I want to ask you the first question. And by the way, thank you so much for coming on the show. I always am very intrigued with people that are creative thinkers. And I think that's sometimes a slim commodity in today's corporate world. How did you ever come up with this idea? Idea.
Well, gentlemen, thanks for having me on your program. It's great to be with you and your listeners here. Well, look, the concept, now the company is 14 years old. Can you believe it? I started this company in college when I was 21 years old. So it's almost 14 years old at this point. So
you were in college doing that, and I was just thinking about keg parties. Where did I go wrong?
Well, I think that within college, I was working on a lot of campaigns, and it's interesting, don't know how old you are, but at my time in college, the people who were running the campaign were boomers who had come of age in a very politically engaged generation, where you could have flyers on the quad and you'd have half the school turn out for a protest about tuition fees or whatever the case may be. And the people running those campaigns, and I worked on a lot of Democratic campaigns, though I'm an independent now, we're always like, Adam, get us a couple thousand students for this or a couple thousand students for that. And it was like, whoa, guys, this is actually a lot more challenging than it may have been in your era, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you have a lot of competing things for attention span, but you saw the importance of having the right context behind a candidate. I mean, would you believe, you probably would, that there were events where like Newsom so I went to UCLA, I should have said that, in Los Angeles. And there were events where Gavin Newsom or Kamala Harris were there, and there'd be like 10 people there, and 5 of those people would be the staff members for them. Right? Like, seriously, it was that bad. So it's like, okay, how do we get more attendance? How do we kind of change that, right? Because I say this a lot, but the same speech has a different resonance if people are in the room or not, right? So imagine Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, right? Delivered in front of 5 people instead of 1 million on the National Mall. The words could have been equivalently beautiful, but it wouldn't have had the same resonance. It's all about creating context. Now, one misnomer about the business is people think, oh, well, what you're doing is manipulative because you kind of pay people to attend events. No, I would say you're always trying to create the right context, right? Like, for example, you get up, you shave in the morning, you wash your face, you shower, right? Why do you do that? Because you're trying to put yourself in the best possible context for whatever it is that you're doing.
Excuse me, the one thing maybe one of the biggest counterpoints or criticisms is they use the term astroturfed crowd. Yeah. That's probably, I would assume, your biggest obstacle or your biggest controversial point of your business, I would think.
Well, that's why I'm here.
Because it's not organic. It's done for show.
Not true, but we'll get into that.
Okay.
Part of that's why I like go on these podcasts, because I'm kind of like, look, there's so much misinformation that if I'm not out there as the founder of the company, as the person who's kind of been running this thing for so long, then how on earth should I expect people to believe anything but what the crazy stuff that people write on social media, right?
Mhm.
So kind of a couple things to address, right? I mean, first of all, the astroturfing term is so childish. When people say astroturf, it's basically astroturf equals movements I don't agree with, right? So liberals are like, oh, that's the Koch brothers, right? And conservatives are like, oh, that's Soros, right? All that is a means to try to delegitimize a cause that you don't agree with, because there are probably rich people and corporations and others who may support that cause, right? So of course, I mean, welcome to America. You have wealthy people and corporations. This is a capitalist country, right? Are on board with almost every major movement, right? So whether it's gay rights, right, civil rights, Tea Party, MAGA, there are corporations and wealthy people behind it, right? And when people are like, oh, that's an astroturf movement, it's like, well, if every movement under that term is astroturf, because every movement has wealthy people behind it who are donating and are also simultaneously trying to shape the movement. And we are Crowds on Demand is a part of that. But what we do is actually far more genuine than people realize, because we just source people who agree with the cause to a protest. We're the catalyst. We create movements, but ultimately the movements have to have a certain amount of sexiness to succeed.
Yeah, good. Before I throw it out to Dr. Lopkin here, uh, do you find that that's kind of the easy out in terms of, let's say there's a rallying point, a rallying event, and you were involved? Isn't that the in some ways, it positive you had the crowd that showed up, that I love the Martin Luther King analogy. So it adds a completely different flavor to the event. But then aren't you giving the opposition, by the nature of your organization, an easy out by saying, well, they're not really adamant about this. They're kind of just pay to play.
Well, what about so let me give you a few examples of other pay to play. Labor unions, right? Labor unions I'm generally a favor of the Democratic candidate, right? But okay, so a candidate comes and there's a bunch of labor union members who are there. I was talking to a fireman who was like, yeah, I was told to go to this Democrat rally, and he's kind of a middle of the road lean Republican, right? And he went because he was told to go. If he didn't go, he would have gotten a crappy shift. If he did go, he's like currying favor with the bosses, right?
Mhm.
So, okay, so what you're saying, I understand, which is that essentially there are ulterior motives that people may have to attend a protest that may take away in the mind of some people from the enthusiasm of the cause. But what I'm saying is everyone coming to a event has some ulterior reason to be there other than purely the purity of their convictions. I mean, you don't think there are people who go to Vietnam War protests as noble of a cause as that is. They were going to get laid and smoke pot, right? Like, come on, let's be real. So, and if that doesn't
Yeah, I
fit.
always thought I was born too late. But anyway, go ahead.
So people, I mean, look at the Real Housewives of Orange County went to the Black Lives Matter protest, right? Do you think these women know anything about institutionalized racism? No, they knew that this was the zeitgeist, and they wanted to post it on the social media so that their followers would understand them to be woke, right? So what I'm saying is there are a lot of reasons. I mean, church groups on the Republican Party are constantly bust into various different events from this or that televangelist, right? Capitol Hill, 15,000 staffers, 15,000 Democrat and Republican staffers. So if you see Ted Cruz or Ocasio-Cortez or whoever out there giving a speech and people are cheering, that's probably people who work for the Republican or Democratic Party. So I guess my point is that you're saying, okay, people may have ulterior motives. Yes, they do. And being paid is one ulterior motive, but it's actually a lesser form of an ulterior motive. Like, yeah, I'm asking you and your listeners, if somebody paid you a couple $100 to betray your convictions, would you do it? Like, I don't know where you guys are at politically, but would you go to an event for the opposite political side, if somebody paid you
Yeah, that's a good point. I would agree with that. That's a very
I
good
think it's
point.
almost cheapening. And some of the people who actually are the biggest critics of my business are actually television pundits, right? Who I'm like, are like, oh yeah, I'm totally genuine, getting 7, 8 figures a year, but these people getting a couple $100 to go to a protest, they can't be legitimate, right? Which is kind of a classist, specious argument. So again, like when you really like, I understand that a lot of people come in and be like, oh, paid protesting, like, oh, what is that? But it's like when you actually break it down, all of the critiques of my business are really completely illegitimate.
Well, I'm glad I asked the question. Dr. Lopkin?
Now, obviously, you started the business, but you're not the only company in this space. And you're talking about the fact that your company in particular looks for people that agree with that position to get them to come to the protest, which, let's face it, that's what every organizer has done since the beginning of time. They're trying to find the folks that agree with them to come show up and have their voices heard. However, we have seen video footage of folks who have stated point blank they were paid to be at the protest, but they know nothing about the issue. They don't necessarily agree or disagree with it. Aren't tactics like that damaging not just to your business and your industry, but to the protests themselves?
Well, I suppose what you're saying is the concept of reductio ad absurdum, which is a Latin term for reducing something to its most absurd, most extreme, right? So, yes, if you're saying that there are people who are hired by I don't know who, someone who
Right.
don't care about the issue. It's kind of like if you ask the CEO of Starbucks, well, there's a coffee shop out there that makes crappy coffee. What's your response as the CEO of Starbucks? And I was like, okay, yeah, there are people who do this and don't do a good job, and I don't even know who they are, right? So, and I think it's stupid. I think it's ultimately counterproductive to hire people who aren't good at their job, because ultimately it's not going to work out for your cause. Just like if you're an organizer for any event, you want to have like a high quality group of people there that reflects well on your cause. I mean, case in point, look at some of the Palestine events, right? A lot of them have had really like a lot of really passionate people, and then you have somebody with the Ayatollah's, photo of the Ayatollah, who kind of delegitimizes the whole thing, right? So, you know, uh yes, there are, if you don't do a good job of vetting. Now, let me kind of talk up my business for a second, which is that we vet all of our people, and there's a reason that we have such a successful track record of persuasive, lawful, peaceful, of course, advocacy, right? I mean, we did delete Facebook, right? This is like a nationwide campaign to hold accountable the sort of evil rot of the social media company that essentially addicted people, misused customer data allegedly, right? And allegedly, through negligence, allowed a genocide in Myanmar to take place, right? Our protest actually was so effective. We did it all over the country, protesting Zuckerberg, protesting his appearances everywhere, that they changed their name. Imagine a $1 trillion company changing their name because of our campaigns, right? So, like, we've pushed pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies to stop discriminatory practices, right? Through nationwide efforts, right? We have won kind of major victories where other people have failed, because we know what we're doing. We use good people, solid people. We know the laws. We know what we can do. We know our rights, and we know what we can't do, and we have good practices. So that's kind of my standard. So if you're saying, hey, there are people who are doing things the wrong way, I completely agree, and they're not going to do well in this field long term.
You
But
you mentioned an interesting point.
you actually just answered my next question, which was, how do you get your company to stand out from the folks that are doing this? But I had actually read a couple of case studies of situations where you had provided crowds, and it looks like the way you choose these is you're essentially not taking sides, but you're trying to bring attention to the issue itself. Is that
Correct.
an accurate statement?
That's a completely accurate statement. One former client called me Paul Revere, said my goal is to spread the word, that something is happening, right? So my goal is to get attention for a cause. Ultimately, a cause or a company, whatever it is only as successful ultimately as its message, right? So I believe, and especially as you correctly said, I'm not a conservative or a liberal. I'm an independent. I've worked with conservatives a lot. I've worked with independents and liberals a lot, but I specialize in getting the attention, especially for issues that are otherwise mainstreamed. Is ignoring, right? So we're experts at taking on those new causes and getting them attention and allowing that bird to fly, right? So ultimately, a bad message, a bad company, a bad cause is ultimately going to fizzle. You can try to bring attention to it but ultimately if there's no support, it's not going to succeed, right? That's why Jeb Bush, that's why Michael Bloomberg, despite so much money, ultimately failed, right? They got plenty of attention, but no one was buying what they were selling, right?
Now,
Kamala Harris.
Yeah, exactly. Question I have though, it seems like your whole business model obviously depends on generating crowds and people at events. How do you what client list, how do you come up with the people? What's your strategy? Is there certain areas that you focus on to bring out certain crowds?
Yeah.
Is it dependent on the event?
All of the above, all of the above. So yes, well, so part of what we do is like PR stunts for a company. So you're a company, you're doing a major product launch. For that, we'd probably source actors, performers, people who have a very performance-centered mindset because we want to create a show and a spectacle, right? For more protests, we are sourcing people who really are on board with the cause. So let's just say we were protesting against the defund the police movement that's crippled a city like Minneapolis. So let's just say we're hiding in Minneapolis to focus on, hey, we need better responsible law enforcement in our city, right? We would source small business owners who have had their stores robbed. We'd source people who have been crime victims, ideally, right? Now, that doesn't mean everyone's going to have personal experience, but as best as we can, these are people who are not only passionate, but experienced in an issue.
Dr. Lopkin?
Yeah. So again, you've said you do PR stunts for corporations as well as the protests. Essentially, again, as we said earlier, your job is to bring attention to something.
Yes.
Have you ever had a situation where you've set up the event and through no fault of your own, through, events out of your control, you've looked back and went, well, that's not an organization we should have worked with. That has gone horribly off the rails.
Well, so let me give you a two-part answer to your question. We've never had a legal arrest, violent, whatever incident at any of our events, at any of our campaigns in our almost 14-year history, right? And I attribute that to the vetting process, which I indicated earlier, and that's a dual vetting process, both vetting the people who work for us, but also vetting the clients and trying to understand, hey, this is going to be a mess or this isn't. And if we know this is going to be a tense environment, putting appropriate security protocols in place, right? And I really pray that stays the case, but that's a pretty good track record, having done thousands and thousands of events over 14 years to have never had an incident. Now, there's a second part to your question, which is, are there campaigns that I regret from an ideological perspective? Yes, there probably are. Yeah, there were probably ones that I wouldn't have taken in the past, right? And obviously, I'm not going to tell you what those are because I protect my client confidentiality.
Right.
And I would never badmouth the client because I love my clients, right? And even the clients who I've later come to strongly disagree with and therefore part ways, it's always on an amicable basis of, hey, I wish you the best, but I don't necessarily currently support that particular mission.
Yes.
A
No,
question
I was
before,
actually
sorry.
referring more to, because something had gone wrong at an event rather than ideology. But what you said is really interesting. And if you could elaborate a little bit, you mentioned how carefully you look at the security. Is that something you provide or you work with your client to provide, making sure that the people who are attending these events are actually safe?
Oh, well, so first of all, most of our events, this is kind of again counter to what most people think. We're not doing these national protests. We're not involved in like ICE or Israel, Palestine, or like first of all, I try to avoid these ones where there's like one group on one side screaming and another group on the other side screaming. For two reasons. Number one, it's because of the security risk. But number two, we're not going to do much good being just part of the noise. I like to really advance things that are a little more nuanced, a little more unconventional, like talk about things that other people aren't talking about, rather than just add bodies to a massive protesters. If you see what I'm saying. So part of that strategy means we avoid some of those things. So I try to avoid even being in that situation. Right now, of course, there are situations that create security. One of the greatest things that we do is we have the greatest security in the world. It's called the police department, right? And the police department actually has a duty to uphold a beautiful thing called the First Amendment, right? So actually, the police are our friends because we're lawful, peaceful protesters. So we've had incidents where building security or whatever, some idiot is trying to be like, oh, you can't be here. We'll call the police and we'll tell the police, hey, this guy is trying to obstruct our First Amendment rights, and the police will actually remind them, no, they're allowed to be there because we know our rights, And the other thing that a lot of idiots try to tell us, these like building security, will like, oh, you need a permit. It's like, no, you don't need a vast majority of, don't let people tell you need a permit unless you have amplified sound, which is like a microphone, or you're blocking off a street. You don't need a permit in the vast majority of cases. So like a lot of times we actually use the police to do their duty to protect our First Amendment expression. So I'm pro law enforcement.
I have a question for you. You mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that you were a Democrat, now independent. Was that a business decision or a personal
Absolutely not.
decision or a combination of both?
Absolutely not a business decision. Uh, it's I don't like the institutions of the parties. I don't like owing anything to a particular party. Because I think both party establishments, as we can very plainly see, are extraordinarily corrupt. I think that's a statement 80 to 90% of Americans would agree with, and with good reason. So why would I want to profess loyalty to a corrupt institution? I'm loyal to my country and my family.
Did your experience in your organization contribute? It's probably an obvious question to your conclusion that they're both corrupt. In other words, your experience in your organization doing what you do.
Yeah, but honestly, I spent a summer interning on Capitol Hill, and that pretty much
That
showed.
could do it.
So,
Yeah,
That
could do it.
would do it. Yes.
so I didn't need to do all of this. Yeah. I mean, you don't have to go very far. I mean, you know, even working on political campaigns, I mean, I witnessed so much just depraved conduct through that it just felt wrong to adhere to either political party. And it helps that my views tend to be moderate, but I would say common sense. Moderate sounds weak. I'm not weak. I'm just common sense. Like, if I would work with conservatives to say, get the drug addicts the hell out of our cities, right? So that doesn't sound moderate, but it's common sense. I don't want anyone shooting up on the side of the road in whatsoever, right? And simultaneously, I don't want anybody dying due to lack of health care, which is a liberal position. Only in America is in a liberal position that people shouldn't have to have a GoFundMe if they get a cancer diagnosis, but it is in this country. So it's like I have positions that are probably very liberal, and I have some positions that are probably considered very conservative, but it balances out somewhat, I think.
Great. Dr. Lopkin?
Excellent. I'd like to get your opinion on perception. Learning journalism back in the 80s and 90s, we were always told, if it bleeds, it leads. And unfortunately, that now seems to be on steroids.
Yeah.
Have you seen events that you have worked that when you see the coverage of them is just out of proportion to what you actually saw happen?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, again, this is another statement that 89% of Americans would agree with. Media is misleading, right? That's like, I think we all know that. I think the challenge with all of this is 80-90%, we all agree media is misleading, but like, oh, but the guy I listen to, he tells the truth.
Right.
Tucker, or, Rachel Maddow, or like that person tells the truth. It's like the same thing with Congress. Like, oh, they're all corrupt, but my guy, he's the only good one of all the 435 congressmen and 100 senators. Like, my guy, he's a straight shooter. It's like, of course that's not true. But the so I guess the reality is that one thing that has made it even worse, though, I guess, to try to give a little bit more novel analysis than media is manipulative, is that the siloed media, in terms of right, left, and now even more niche than that, has made it easier because, okay, you can do an event, a protest, really targeted with a very niche group. So the only people who hear about it is this niche group of, let's just say, 0.5% or even less of the country, but 0.5% of the country is still more than 1 million people, right? So you can have these sort of niche events that then go viral in a way that wasn't the case before, because even 10, 15 years ago, you had Fox News on the right, and you had kind of obviously left-wing media, liberal mainstream media, but now you have so many different silos far beyond that, and where you can reach a narrow group, and therefore go viral with that particular group, and that in a way makes it more reason to do protests in a way, because you can reach those groups, but on the other hand, conversely, to do something that actually generates national attention, a la like Martin Luther King style, where every American was watching MLK and John Lewis on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, right? The famous scenes.
Yep.
It's really hard to create those type of scenes that have national reach anymore without it basically getting clipped and siloed for the consumption of the particular siloed media.
I have a question before I throw it out to Dr. Lopkin. It seems like you would be a real good barometer of possibly the political climate in America. Do you get a sense, like a first row seat to that? In other words, before it becomes, I use the term mainstream, but I don't mean media wise, but like, do you see things evolving? You talk about your own evolution. Do you see that, by doing what you do? Are people moving a certain direction, or do you see it just kind of business as usual? Or does it depend on who's in power?
I think it very much the last thing is very much true. One kind of interesting thing is we tend to be used more as a opposition. So like, from the perspective, I mean, naturally, protest is sort of the underdog's approach, right? So it's so funny. A lot of people have falsely said, "Oh, we're the tool of big tech or big pharma," when in fact we take on big tech and big pharma, right? If you're Google, why do you need to hire protesters? You own Congress, right? Like, seriously, why do you need to hire protesters when you own basically every member of Congress? So it's the competitor to Google that needs to hire us. Do you see what I'm saying?
Sure.
If you're big pharma, you own Congress, right? You don't need us, right? Like, AstraZeneca, Pfizer doesn't need to hire us to protest. They have nothing to protest. They've won, right? It's the other side who's taking on Pfizer who needs to protest. So we tend to be like, I'm not saying our services are cheap, but it's the entrenched power structures build multi-billion dollar infrastructure, multi-billion dollar infrastructure, revolving doors, campaign contributions, lobbyists, lawyers, they write the laws, right? So protest is actually a tool of an asymmetric, lawful way to push back against the infrastructure that entrenched power structures build. Do you see what I'm saying? Right?
Mhm.
In the sense of they're the British Army, we're the Continental Army, right? They're so to extend the Paul Revere analogy, right? Protest is a way to fight again legally, lawfully, metaphorically, these battles, right, against the entrenched power structures, because you're never going to hire more lobbyists than Google, right? No, that's not what's going to happen. You're never going to contribute to more political campaigns than Google, or have revolving door like Facebook, right? You're not going to win on those metrics. But what you can do is harness the power of protest to create public pressure to then build movements that then are unignorable and that force action. Do you see what I'm saying?
Sure, certainly, yes. Dr. Lopkin?
Yeah, I like what you just said about making issues unignorable. Yeah, we talked earlier about the fact that your core mission is essentially to bring attention to specific issues. And we talked about the siloing of media. So everybody's reaching fewer people, but more involved. How has that siloing and that effect over the last 14 years affected your business? Is it that much harder to bring attention to the issues you're working with?
Well, two things on that. Well, and number one, by the way, when I was using the examples of big tech and big pharma, those are national examples. But and obviously, to do an effective national protest campaign requires a lot of resources. But even think about locally who taking on even locally or on micro issues to take these type of things on, right? So a lot of times, like again, obviously we've taken on big tech, big pharma, but we've taken on so many smaller micro issues within local communities, states, regions, where we're kind of essentially doing the same thing. But obviously it doesn't require the same amount of resources. So that's kind of an important thing to mention, is that we actually, all of us, have sort of power in our own lives to affect change on these sort of local, micro, regional issues. Yeah, I mean, again, I can only restate what I've said, which is that in terms of getting national attention and capturing America's hearts and minds is really hard. Like, no one has 80% approval anymore. No one, like, who's the Mr. Rogers of our age? We're like 90% are like, we love this guy. Like, it's hard because and if that person is there, as soon as they talk about politics, that's going to go down to 50%. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So even if you had somebody who is 90% approval, as soon as they talk about politics, boom, half the country hates them. So this is the challenge, is that it's really hard to get to rise above that. So it's hard, therefore, to create those national movements in a way. But I do think there are a couple issues that merit the national movements, and I think where you can have that consensus. And one is big tech, and the other is big pharma, because I think those are 90-10 issues, right? Where or even more, where like I can't find anyone, even people who are paid by big tech won't defend big tech. You know what I mean? I kid you not. Like, go to the Silicon Valley and go to a restaurant in the Silicon Valley and ask the people making $500,000 a year working for software companies what they think about their employers. They hate their employers. You know what I mean? So if their own employees hate them, everyone else hates them too. So there is an ability to take on the big tech and the big pharma. Those are probably the two issues. But where I always say to avoid trying to create a hero, because heroes are fallible, right? I mean, look at
Yes.
Cesar Chavez, right? This is a very recent example, right? You can't create a hero because people are fallible, and even people who might be, I mean, Martin Luther King was a very imperfect man, as we know, right? Cesar Chavez, right, is even more like deeply troubling things, right? So instead of my other advice to people is make it about a movement. Don't create a figurehead. The figureheads are flawed.
To a final question, and by the way, thank you so much for being our guest.
Of course.
Business question, two business questions, very minor though. What differentiates your company from your competition?
Mhm.
And I'll even follow. And my second question is, you need to, how can people get in contact with you and your organization? So
Uh,
what is your big differentiators?
Well, so the biggest differentiator is number one, vetted people. And number two, I hope people think I have a good strategic sense because they're sort of paying for it when they hire us to some degree, right? And the strategic sense, and let me actually work your audience through because I'll give a little free advice. Maybe I shouldn't do it, but I will. How I approach things. Um, because this could be helpful to people in their own lives, right? Is this is my process of how I often help clients really refine their approach and decide and save a lot of money on how to actually focus their effort. Number one, determine what your goal is. What is your actual goal? And identify specific objectives. So Occupy Wall Street is a great example. They never did that. They actually never had specific objectives, and therefore they failed because they never actually were able to create a demand list, even in the most opportune time where everybody hated Wall Street. They still failed miserably. They never had a list of policies, right? So bad, right? Number two, identify who can actually help you resolve your issue. So even on a personal level, let's just say like you're in a really crappy situation, you're behind on your rent, right? And you're being served an eviction notice, right? Well, that's pretty crappy. Maybe the manager of your building isn't in a position to offer you an extension, but maybe there's somebody who the owner or whoever they work for is, right? So you have to identify who actually is in power to help you, because otherwise you could end up arguing or reasoning with somebody who couldn't help you even if they wanted to. Number three, what matters to that person, right? You have to figure out. So if I'm trying to persuade a Democrat city council person to do something, saying it's anti-business probably isn't going to help. They don't care, right? But saying it's racist might help, right? Because they're sensitive to accusations of racism, right? Or if it's a Republican saying, "Oh, well, you're going to piss off Trump," that might help, right? You see what I'm saying? So you have to figure out what actually matters to them. So in the personal like example of, okay, you're getting evicted, right? Well, you might say, "Oh my God, I can't get evicted. My kids, my home, like I won't know what to do." Well, that doesn't really matter to the landlord ultimately, right? What matters to them is money, probably, right? So how are you going to make it worthwhile for them to give you a break on the rent? Well, maybe they would have to pay a lawyer to evict you, and that's going to take months, and you could trash the home. I mean, not that I'm condoning threatening to trash your home, but but conversely, you could say, I can set up a payment plan, right? And get current within 2 months. So make it worth their while to work with you. You see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Um, so basically, so you reason with them, and then the last one is don't take lip service, right? Don't take lip service, meaning make sure that you're actually getting something of consequence rather than somebody being like, "Yes, I hear you. I agree 100%," without actually helping you resolve the problem. Right. So I'm actually giving away some of the approach that I use because I mean, spelling it out and doing it are two different things, but this is part of how we actually distinguish ourselves is we're very strategic with how we operate. And by actually following this step, you can save yourself a lot of time and money by focusing your efforts specifically on the right people, messaging to those people, and being really targeted in your approach.
And the best way to get in contact with you would be what?
Crowdsondemand.com.
Website? I'm sorry, go ahead. Somebody.
www.crowdsondemand.com.
Very good. Well, Adam, I can't thank you enough, Dr. Lockman. What a great guest, correct?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for
Can't
being
thank you
on the
enough.
show. And of course, for our listeners, we'd love to get your opinion on everything we've talked about and the issues of the day. Go to xvadio.com/connect. Let us know what you're thinking. You can also message us at the Carnivore Radio Facebook page. And of course, you can catch every episode of Carnivore Bites at xvadio.com, the Carnivore Radio website, the Apple Podcast app, YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and other platforms that respect freedom of speech.
Adam, thanks again.
Thanks, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next week.